let's get on to our first main topic of the day. And our first main topic of the day is a doozy. And it comes to us from Brian Wollington, who writes, "Hey, John, have you been following the stuff that's going on with the Justice Department possibly striking down the Paramount Consent Decrees?" Right now, everybody's going, what?
Right.
Basically, there are laws that prevent monopoly-like behavior from the studios when it comes to movie theaters. It sort of looks like a doomsday scenario for movie theaters, but I don't really see anybody talking about it. What do you think? All right. The Paramount Consent Decrees.
It's a big topic, John.
It is a big topic. And now listen, the thing, most of you will be at least familiar with one of the repercussions of the Paramount Consent Decrees, and that is that studios generally, there are some minor exceptions like Disney owning the El Capitan, but generally speaking, one of the ramifications of these laws was the fact that studios can't own movie theaters. But the laws went much further than just that, Rob. The basic understanding of these things was, prior to these laws being passed, and this is going back decades and decades and decades and decades.
48. They were passed
1948. And it was introduced, I think, 2 years before that. Mm-hmm. The basic principle here was this. Movie studios were able to exert a lot of power and create monopoly-like situations over movie theaters, movie theater chains. For example, one of these things the Paramount Consent Decrees laws stopped was studios' ability to go to a movie theater and say, yeah, we'll let you put our big new mega blockbuster in your movie theater, but only if you also commit to putting our suck-ass movie in your movie theater for the same amount of time that you have our blockbuster. That sort of power and control was anti-competitive, and it was bad for the consumer. So they passed a law that prevented that. The other sort of scenario that it allowed at the time was them able to block book their movies over regions. It's like, yeah, you can play our mega blockbuster movie, but you can't play the other guy's blockbuster movie if you're going to play ours. And like today, Rob, we would hear that and we would think there's no way you could have let something like that happen. But that's what these laws kind of prohibited. Now listen, the good folks over at Slash Film, a terrific article written by Ben Pearson over at Slash Film, basically gets into it, and he starts talking about what are the ramifications going to be, because it looks like Congress is going to move, or the Justice Department is going to move to get rid of these things and get rid of these protections and these laws. And anyway, this is one of the things that he writes here, and let me just make sure I get this in here better. He goes,
you got to read it in that voice you just did.
Yeah!
I love that voice.
The 1920s radio voice. All right, listen, sadly, writes Ben, the negatives far outweigh. Now, I don't normally like to read too much on screen, but this is important stuff, guys. Believe me, I know this isn't, woo, when's the next Flash movie coming? But believe me, this is important stuff for us as film fans. Sadly, the negatives far outweigh the positives here. My example above about Paramount holding a theater hostage for the ability to show the next Mission Impossible could now become the new normal, which is not only terrible for the theater owners, who would be strong-armed into showing movies they would otherwise not show, but also terrible for consumers, since those screenings would mean that smaller independent films, like this year's Parasite, for example, would not be able to play in those theaters like they would have today. Many independent theaters, which are struggling as it is, simply won't be able to stay afloat without being able to rely on major blockbusters throughout the year. A Forbes article from last year suggested that this overhaul, if it indeed comes to pass, it could also mean that smaller studios not just smaller movie theaters, smaller studios, may very well cut back their release schedules, fearing a lack of available screens for their smaller titles, thereby limiting the choices that moviegoers have when they head to their local multiplexes. That same article also points out that under our current laws, studios are mandated. This is important. I remember when I worked at AMC, this was a big deal. This is important. Listen to this. Under the current laws, studios are mandated. It's the law that they provide a viewing of all their movies prior to negotiating with the movie theaters. But if this decree is wiped out, there will be no system of checks and balances. Basically saying, I remember I knew the guy at AMC whose job it was to preview the movies the studios are wanting the theaters to put in their movie theaters. And it was his job to go in and watch these movies first, make an assessment about how successful he thinks they could be, who they'd appeal to, blah, blah, blah. And then the movie theater chain can develop their negotiating strategy about, whether or not to bring and how many screens to put that movie on in their theaters. That's required. Movie theaters wouldn't even have that option anymore. Studios could just no, we're not going to show you a preview of our movie. You just got to negotiate it anyway and just believe it on blind faith. It's an excellent article, and I'm going to recommend, guys, that you go over to /film and read it. Again, it's terrifically laid out and terrifically written. You should go check it out. Rob, this to me really is a nightmare scenario, because not only is it terrible for film goers, because we are by default going to get fewer choices and fewer options in the movies we're getting. It's terrible for studios like A24 or other smaller studios that put out some great, terrific content, knowing that, oh, you don't have room for our movie on your screens because Disney said if you want to show Star Wars Episode 10, you got to show these 5 other pieces of crap Disney classic movies that we're putting out, or whatever their banner would be. Some crappy movies Disney Studios is putting out. You would rather have ours, but you can't because in order to have Star Wars, you had to put these 5 other pieces of crap movie. Great, no screens for us to. Okay, what do we do? How does a smaller studio make movies if there's no screens to put their movies on? It's a terrible, untenable situation. Now, I'm not worried, Rob, about studios having their own movie theaters, because studios know owning movie theaters is a money-losing proposition. They're not going to put up $25 billion to build 600 theater multiplexes across thing. They're not going to do it because they know they can't make any money at it. So I'm not worried about that. But all this other stuff I think is significant. Rob, let me ask you, somebody who's really steeped in the history of all this kind of stuff, are there upsides to them striking down this law? And how do you see it? Am I overstating the possible negative ramifications here? How do you see it?
No, first of all, I don't see that there's a lot of upsides. When I was a kid in the 80s, I had a friend, Craig Hyland, and we used to go to all of, we called them blind bidding screenings, because what that meant was these laws, like you read, prevented all the studio chains that would bid on movies from the studios would have to see them first, because they were getting burned. They were booking movies into their theater chains that weren't very good, and they were losing money. So it got to the point, because of the studio strong-arming tactics and because of these laws, the studios would have to show their movies to the theater chains first, so they could know if they're going to make money or not. And I think rescinding those laws and making it so. What, are movie theater chains now going to have to bid on movies sight unseen again? This is a terrible, terrible thing for movie theaters, because what if they bid on movies that aren't good? Like, what if you're all excited about getting Catwoman in your theater, Pitoff's Catwoman, and then you've based your entire summer movie season around getting, well, what if you wind up with 3 Catwomen because you haven't seen these movies first? Where does that leave you? And at least all the studios had to. We go to CinemaCon, John. It's all the theater owners that are there. The studios are rolling out their product. They're trying to get theater owners to be excited about these new movies. Well, now the studios aren't going to have to do things like that anymore. They're just going to use these old school strong arm tactics, and it's not good for theater owners. And what studios also can do is they can start buying movie theaters themselves. And they can control all of both production and distribution of movies. And along with the streaming services they control, I don't think it's great for the consumer, and I certainly don't think it's great for the movie business.
And it raises a lot of questions too, because one of the things that the studios have been trying to push the theaters to do very quietly behind the scenes, the studios have been trying to push theaters to introduce tiered level ticket pricing. Now, some people think the idea of tier-leveled ticket pricing is a good thing. Well, wouldn't it be great? Like, I got to pay $15 for a ticket. Wouldn't it be great if I could go see Parasite for $7? Like, since that's a less attended, make it cheaper. That's not how it would work. If they introduce tier-level pricing, they're not going to use that as a solid foundation for lowering the ticket prices of other movies, they're going to use it as a pretext to up the ticket prices for the movies they want focused on. Okay, yes, movie theater number one, we'll put in Black Panther 2 in your movie theater, sure, but because this is one of the things the laws limit. We specifically want you to charge $33 a ticket for Black Panther 2. But that's not what we charge for a ticket for admission. Doesn't matter. For this movie, for our movie, $32 for a ticket. And you got to charge that. It's not going to lower ticket prices on anything else. And listen, let me fully acknowledge here that these are all worst case scenarios that I'm painting.
Right.
They could strike down these laws and it may not turn out to be that bad or this bad. But it does give them the leeway to make it this bad if they so choose. And it's a bad decision. It would be a monumentally bad decision for the theater industry, for consumers. I just think this is a terrible, terrible situation. Again, I cannot highly recommend enough, guys. You guys head over to Slash Film, check out the article there, and several other places have done a good pieces on it well, but I particularly like the piece over there. So go check that out, and then jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right.